Can I just say, I watched Tiger King yesterday.
I watched a little bit of it.
I watched it in its entirety. I went all the way in. And I did
all of season 2?
All of season 2.
Okay.
I'd already seen season 1 with the rest of the world, right, during the height of the pandemic. And can I just say that, first of all, I did it for research purposes.
Oh, of course.
Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Me too.
Because our own Shay McAlister is in it.
I know. It's big time.
Yeah. Shay did so many reports on Tim Stark, who was running a big cat sanctuary, or a big animal sanctuary, I guess, in southern Indiana. And this is the first time ever since I've been here that we've had a guest on the show.
Really?
Yeah, because of COVID, we can't have guests in the building, but you're not a guest. Technically.
Well, no, I work here, so I guess I'm allowed in. I'm not breaking any rules.
Right,
Shay,
right.
kudos to you. You're reporting early on with Tim Stark. And I mean, for all transparency here, Eric and I fangirl over you a lot.
Yeah.
And not just because it is a big story. Your reporting in it is so good. And
Thank
it's
you.
so solid. And I hope, gosh, where do we begin?
I told us that I hope you get your flowers today.
Right? I hope so too.
But let's talk about that. So, as we mentioned, Shay's done several reports on Tim Stark up in southern Indiana. I was talking with you on Friday, and my question was like, how did that come about? How did, not the reporting, obviously, we know how that came about, but Netflix. What do you do when Netflix calls and say, hey, it's Netflix? Is Shay around?
Right. Well, if you're me, you tell your boss, because as you guys know, we can't just decide to do something like that. We're under contract, so it was all up to the bosses, whether or not we did it. And I told Eric on Friday, it wasn't an immediate yes. There was other things in play. We were doing COVID coverage, which was taking, president over everything when they first called, which was March of 2020. Then we were covering Breonna Taylor protests. So it wasn't until the end of the summer when we finally said, yes, okay, we'll do this. You guys can come along for our investigation.
Well, that's great presence of mind anyway,
Exactly.
because when an agency as big as Netflix, we all work on camera, it's hard to put that to the back burner, but out of respect for what was happening here in this community, obviously you did the right thing.
Right.
So talk us through this. Talk about how Tim Stark, for people who haven't seen Netflix or haven't seen the second season of Tiger King, talk about how your reporting managed to filter its way into this series.
Sure. So we started looking into the operation in southern Indiana known as WHAS11's. I would say mid-2018, so three going on 4 years ago. And we filed a lot of open records requests. It took us about a year to get any of those documents back in a way that we could actually use them. But when we did, we found hundreds of pages of violations and incident reports and injury reports. There was a lot of problems happening at this facility. And it took us some time, but we finally found some former staff members that would actually talk to us about what was happening and put a voice to some of those allegations. So we happened to release our report in February of 2020, and just a few weeks later, Netflix came out with Tiger King, and Tim Stark was one of the people who was featured. We had no idea.
Was it any surprise to you when you were in the middle of covering it early on and you're like, oh my goodness, this is #crazytown, and this could really turn into something else, and see what was happening with Netflix? I mean, did it start to process in your mind as, wow, those cameras and that attention could come squarely right here?
I think when I first found out, it was actually people who were watching it, and I wasn't watching it at first, and people were telling me, oh, did you know that guy you've been investigating is on Netflix? So I started watching the series trying to find him, and he played a really small role, but people always say in this, they call it like the tiger world, the big cat world, they're all connected. And so it wasn't shocking to see him, but maybe a little bit shocking to see a story I was covering here for local news, making it up onto, Netflix.
Yeah.
So there's a talent level and a technical ability. I know you went to one of the premier journalism schools in the country, Mizzou. There's an ability to cover news that is respected, right? The journalistic approach to things. But one thing that is often not talked about when we look at stories like this is the level of sheer composure that it takes for you to do your job. And I know that I've been talking to people about, those of you who have not yet seen the second season, but for those of you all have, you know what I'm talking about. There's a point in it, Shay, where in a gaggle of reporters, this is where there are a big group of reporters asking questions, where Tim Stark laser focuses on you and does it in a nasty, vicious, awful, horrible way. And your response was so flawless. You acted like he didn't say anything, and you just went on with your line of questioning. I think it's actually in this moment here or something similar to it.
Yeah, that's just like a few minutes after it happened. It was shocking a little bit that he was going to talk like that in front of everyone. Honestly, he had talked to me like that for, more than a year at this point. This was just kind of how he talked to me, and how he talks to a lot of people. He uses a lot of crazy language, a lot of name calling, just kind of how he operates. So I had a feeling on this day, which was a really high stress day for him, seeing me, who he, is not a huge fan of, would probably be two things that didn't match up, super, I don't know, flowery, nice way.
Yeah,
so I was a little bit prepared for.
Your composure
Your
level was on 10.
composure is
It was
unreal,
fantastic.
right? Like, how did you use that as strategy to poke the bear, so to speak? That this is how he is. That becomes like your strategy in reporting. Because your composure is just unreal. It really is.
Well, I appreciate
that.
that.
Unnerves people, I'm sure, right? When you need to get a question out of somebody.
I think I'm going to. I interview a lot of people who don't want to be interviewed by me, and so over the years, I've just kind of. I don't know. I've kind of developed, I guess, a thick skin to asking questions, and sometimes people, try to get away from you or try to dodge you, and it's part of my. I've gotten used to it a little bit.
I'll ask about the what's next question to see if you have any reports that we should keep an eye out. But before we get there, we should talk about what really propelled you to this level of at least people knowing you more than they normally would as a local reporter, and that's Bardstown, the podcast that you did on the series of unsolved murders in Bardstown. First of all, that was amazing.
Thank you.
That's what caught my attention first when it came to just my level of being overly impressed with you. What can you tell us about where that stands right now? That's a big question because there's so many, but.
Well, there is a little bit of an update. So just last week, we talked with the new special agent in charge. So there's a new leader at Louisville's FBI. And we, of course, asked her about Crystal Rogers and where the case stands. And she told us that she actually had already met with the agents and that they are now working with the Nelson County Prosecutor's Office. So important to note, the FBI is investigating Crystal Rogers' case. But they are helping on all the other cases, and a lot of people think if you find answers in one, you could find answers in all of them. So the fact that they're working with prosecutors, that could mean that they're talking about criminal charges, possible indictments, and we could see some arrests.
Okay.
Yeah. Since you covered it from the beginning, would you say, wow, that's probably the most significant moving forward that you've seen in covering it, that you're like, yeah?
I would say next to the FBI announcing that they were going to be taking the lead and publicly serving all of these search warrants and bringing boxes of evidence out of homes, that was a pretty big moment too. But I think this probably for the community is the biggest step forward, biggest thing to grasp onto, that it's not just an investigation anymore. There could be a next step.
It's great to have you working this the way that you are, because we all know in local news what you might not know. So many reporters and anchors work on contracts that are finite, 2 years here, 3 years there. So you've got a lot of turnover in local news, and you've been here long enough to have longevity of reporting on this, and so that just puts you in a position to do it probably a lot better than other people. Let's be real about that. So kudos to the WHAS11 newsroom for putting you in that position and then supporting you.
We talked about like just the power of storytelling, right? Like the ability to tell these very convoluted stories that go in a lot of, from Crystal Rogers to Tiger King to Tim Stark, they could go in a lot of different directions. And I think the focus to tell that story beginning to end in a really clear way has been what's been so captivating about it.
What's next for you? Any other?
Tell us.
Obviously, we've talked about two essential stories or topics that you cover, but that's a very small part of your day, actually.
Right, yeah. Those are my biggest things that I kind of keep going always. But sure, I'm always working on projects in the background. So I cover unsolved stories, I cover cold cases, and we have a couple of really interesting ones coming up in December and January and into February.
Right.
So that could be something to
Do you
look
feel
for.
like after this, like a lot of people, I know you've been inundated on Twitter with lots of Twitter love there. Do you feel like now more than ever people are reaching out with these amazing story ideas because they've seen this coverage?
Yeah, I think, and I'm lucky. Like you said, I've been here, going on 7 years, which is a long time in this market and in in every market. And so a lot of people, I think, are finally getting to know me and are sending great stories, and that's my favorite part of this job. That's the whole point, right?
Great reporters get great stories, and you are a great reporter, Shay. Thank you so much for
Thank you so
coming in and
much.
joining us
Thanks,
and being
guys.
technically our first semi-guest.
Yes,
in
that's
6
awesome.
months.